Alright, here we go. We're painting up Wyrd's Malifaux Misaki figure from the 10 Thunders. Very highly detailed, very difficult to build model, standing on one damn tippy toe. But it's all built. We're going on to the painting now, and I'm starting off with some Vallejo Game Color Falcon Turquoise mixed with a little bit of black. Turquoise is one of those really hard colors to work with because it's blue and green, so a lot of people have problems figuring out how to shade and highlight it. I do as well. And I just went the easy route and just mixed a tiny amount of black in with it. Could have mixed in a darker green and darker blue to make a mix and then mix that in, but I went the easy route. And you just want to add a small amount of black, since black is obviously so dark. You don't want to darken and dull it too much. But that's what we're doing here. Again, paint, as always, just thinned slightly and going over the whole model to make sure everything is covered. I'm skipping the second shade layer and going straight on to the turquoise. Straight turquoise, Falcon Turquoise, because black really, if you use black as a shade color, really dulls your colors, and I didn't want to dull this too much, so we're only going to do one shade and concentrate more on the highlights. So going over with our base color of the Falcon Turquoise, and as usually it's slightly thinned, leaving that shade color just in the deepest recesses. Again, turquoise is a hard color to highlight and shade, so for the highlights, just mixing in some white to the base color of the Falcon Turquoise. And if you're mixing in a light color like this, kind of like with the black, you don't want to mix too much because white is so light. If you mix in too much to the turquoise, you're going to fade out your paint job really fast. So just very small amount of white to this color. And the proper way to shade this color would be to go get yourself a bottle of light colored turquoise and a dark colored turquoise and a medium colored turquoise if you want to do this properly. If I was doing this over a repeated number of times, I would be doing that. And but this is just a one-off. And something actually I just noticed that I don't think my camera is picking up this color very well. This is looking a lot more blue than the color actually looks. There is a definite amount of green in the in this actual turquoise color, so if that's not coming out, I do apologize, but trust me, this is a bluish green color. Now moving on to our second highlight, again just adding a bit more white to the previous layer and repeating the process on a smaller area. And now we're doing something completely different. Nah, just kidding, just more white added to the previous mixture. You can see that process is going a lot faster, and I'm not just talking about the speeded up tape here, but since we're working on smaller and smaller areas, it's a quicker brush stroke, covers the entire area that I'm working on, and so as you move on, it starts getting a bit quicker. So we're going to do this time, and then one more, I believe, just for the edges of the model. And here we are one last time. Again, more white added. This is just the edging step. You can see it's just on the very tips of the highest areas that are getting a highlight. That's what gives you a nice good deal of contrast, adds a crisp edge to wherever you need it on those tight folds or edges of the clothes or what have you. As I've always said, don't overdo this step. Very small highlights just on the tips is what you want here. If you highlight too much, too large of an area, it destroys the effect and you lose the contrast basically by putting too much of it on. And this is done, so we can move on to the next step. The armor and some other bits, I decided I wanted to be a dark gold, and a slight variation from my standard gold mix. Picked up a bottle, my only bottle of Army Painter paint. This is Greedy Gold, slightly darker version than my standard Vallejo Game Color Glorious Gold. And this is going on as a base coat mixed with Game Color Beastie Brown to make sure that everything covers well. Always want to mix your metallics in with a non-metallic paint in the beginning just to make sure you get good coverage, and then you can go over, once that dries, go over with your straight metallics to bring out the sheen. Now the previous coat gave us a good solid layer to build up our metallics on, so now we're going with straight Army Painter Greedy Gold, and all over the same area again. The armor's pretty well textured, so that's more dry brushed. There's no reason to get all the paint in the recesses when it's going to get covered up eventually by a wash anyway. Now for the highlights, I'm using what I normally use as my base color for gold, which is Vallejo Game Color Glorious Gold. Instead, I'm using that as a highlight color here because I did want this a little bit darker. So I'm just picking out the details on the headdress and a little bit of dry brushing along the scales and various other bits. Finishing up with a wash to pick out the details. This is a mixture of it's a brown ink with just a little bit of black added. Again, I wanted this to be a bit darker than my standard bright gold. And this texture armor it takes really well to washes, and it really helps to pop out the details on the headdress, as you'll probably see. You're going to have to wait till the end to see that though. Doing some trim work now, and forgive me, but we're going to skip over this really fast. This is the same mixture that I've used on my Dark Elves in a couple of videos. It's a shade layer of Vallejo model color violets, and then that gets worked up into model color blue violet, and then highlighted with some Game Color Ghost Gray a couple times, and we're already at 8 minutes, so we're gonna just jump to the end of this section. And here we are adding the final highlights to this violet color. Again, if you want to see the full process, please go check out some of my Dark Elf painting videos. But we're not even halfway through here, and I don't want you sitting watching this thing forever now. Moving on to the weapons now, I decided I wanted a really dark metal color, something closer to iron, and so I mixed a heavy amount of black with some Vallejo Game Color gun metal, or just gun, excuse me, it's called, and we're putting that all over, and then going to proceed to add more and more of the gun color to that mix to work up to the highlights. And then after working up to straight gun color, just added a small amount of Vallejo air steel color just to pick out the edging on the blade. finally on to the hard part here, which is the freehand work. I suck at freehand, I'll tell you right now. I try to do as little of it as possible and do it the simplest way. So if anyone out there thinks that they can't do this, if I can do it, you can do it too. We're going to do a sort of tree motif on the Misaki here, and starting out with some chocolate brown, and we're just kind of painting sort of zigzag lines, roughly representing tree branches, but not being too careful about how accurate it is. And I'm just trying to use very, very fast strokes of the brush. And I started at the bottom and tried working my way up like a tree, and I actually realized halfway through it's better if you just put random quick strokes here and there and then connect them with smaller strokes. It was looking a lot better when I was doing it that way. And this is just the first layer of branches. I lost some footage somewhere, but after doing that step, I went over to visually reinforce all the branches with a lighter brown, some English uniform. Not exactly to highlight it, but just to sort of highlight it, also get some variation in the effect. Once that was done, now I'm going on to paint what I choose to call cherry blossoms, or cotton balls off a cotton plant, if you will. So I'm using some model color khaki, and I'm just making dots with the tip of my brush here. You will need a newer fine-tipped brush to do this work, and also it's going to ruin the brush pretty quickly. That's why I usually don't want to use the tip of your brush when you're doing normal painting. Save the tip for stuff like this. And whenever you're doing freehand work, I find it's a lot easier if you do dots instead of lines, rather than drawing out a picture using your brush as a pen or a pencil. Make it out of dots instead, and it's a lot easier to accomplish. So we're starting off with the model color khaki. This is the first layer, shade, whatever you want to call it, but start with the darkest layer, and then we're going to work our way up to some lighter colors. Now I've mixed a large amount of white into the previous khaki layer, and again just going over those khaki dots and reinforcing them. And this has a dual effect. First of all, it's giving me depth, it's giving dimension to the image, picture, whatever I'm painting here, the flowers. Secondly, the previous khaki layer is basically telling me where to put this layer, because the first layer was sort of like drawing out the map, and now I have the map drawn, I can go in and fill in the colors right on top of the khaki. So this lighter color helps to, it adds depth, it adds dimension, and I'm also reinforcing the pattern that I'm drawing on the figure here, in this case my little cherry blossoms. Now I'm starting to paint some flowers in with some game color Warlock purple, and two mistakes that I did here. First of all, I painted these as small as I possibly could, which was a mistake. I should have made these a little bit larger so it would have been easier to highlight them and define them later. As it was, I was trying to paint as small as possible, which means when I wanted to try to paint smaller, it didn't work out. So larger is better when you're doing this freehand stuff. Secondly, to do the petals, what I decided to do was try to paint sort of a rough star pattern, just basically 6 lines intersecting, and I realized a little bit later on it's actually a lot better if instead of doing that, just paint a circle for your flower, because kind of like the cherry blossoms here, I'm not really painting a flower at this point. What I'm painting is the map of where I want the flower to go. The flower will start appearing once I put that second layer on. So a circle is a lot easier to paint, and also I should be making these a bit larger. And once we move on to the highlighting, we'll start getting that flower pattern appearing. Now with the flowers mapped out, we can start actually painting in the petals by mixing in a good amount of squid pink to our warlock purple. And again, this is where I screwed up by painting the first ones too small, because now trying to go in and paint the petals is nearly impossible. Starting with a dot in the center of my purple circle, and then painting 6 or 7, or depending on how many fit in each circle, just more dots around that center circle to highlight or to emphasize the petal effect. And again, it's try to paint dots, because dots are a heck of a lot easier than painting lines when you're doing freehand work, and dots will get you really, really far. Also, whenever you're doing freehand work like this, this is about the only time other than eyeballs I'm using a brush smaller than a number 2. This is done with a number 0, and the brush, the tip on the brush goes really fast, so don't be surprised if you ruin your brushes doing this type of work. And the problem with using a brush that small is that the paint dries so fast. That's why you want to use a larger brush whenever possible. So you may need to put some extenders in your paint. It's really dry in California right now, so this was extremely difficult. I could get about 1 flower done, and I had to go back and clean the brush out before moving on to the next. It's a slow process, but it's what I set up for myself. And the last thing to do is to add a bit of highlight to the center of the flower, so again, giving a bit more depth and detail. And that's done just by mixing in some white into that previous mixture, and just trying to hit the center, the nucleus of each flower, whatever you call that. As you can see, I painted the rest of the trim in the model with that same warlock purple squid pink mix, and now last thing to paint is this big swoosh thing that she's doing with her foot. I really don't like this at all. It looks like something that would be in a comic book, and I really didn't know what to do with it. I'm just painting it a very light colored white, starting with some game color somber gray to cover up the black so I could paint white over that. Well, excuse me, this is not white, this is Wolf's Gray, or is it Ghost Gray? No, Wolf Gray from Game Color. And going over this thing because I didn't know what other color to paint it at the time. It's not a spell effects, it's just sort of a fast motion swoosh. I guess that's what you would call it. And then following up the Wolf's Gray by adding white a couple times and doing some more highlights on this swooshy thing. I really would have loved to leave it off if it wasn't for the fact that it's supporting a majority of the model. After staring at this for a couple days, this is the one thing I don't like on this miniature. I may repaint this thing in a darker color just so it takes away some of the emphasis to it, because I don't like how it looks. Also, I didn't paint a whole lot of contrast in it either, because I really didn't think a high kicky swooshy thing should have a lot of contrast. But if I go back and paint it a darker color, a darker gray, it would take some of the emphasis off this thing that I do not like. But anyway, wrapping up the figure here, and we are done. And there we have it, one Misaki figure all painted with all the tedious freehand work done. again, if I can do this, you can do this. This is, just remember the dot method. It's very simple. Again, I went a bit too small on this. You would be a lot better off, well, I would be too, going for a larger pattern. I did this so small it was hard to highlight, and also it looks quite busy for this figure. I think a larger pattern would have looked cleaner. It would have looked more like actual flowers. But hey, like I said, I'm not really good at this, so if you're following along at home, do the same thing, but yeah, make it bigger. As always, thanks for watching. See you soon.